And we're back with part 5 of our inventory series. So last time we created Blueprint's pickups base pickup, and we completed that so we can pick up an item in the world. And then when we pick it up right now, it's just going to our print string at the top. Now, instead of it coming through our print string, let's go and let that pop up in the actual inventory menu, which brings us to the next event, which is over here. Button clicked. Now we can finally do this event. To start with, let's go and add our inventory over to this piece of script here. As you may have remembered, this is the piece of script that we were waiting on the actual inventory. So drag in reference hero, drag off of that, get inventory. And the first thing we can do is length. And we can plug length into here. So this for each loop is only going to run for the length of the inventory. Basically, if we have 10 slots filled from 0 to 9, then when we get to slot 10, it's not going to do anything here. It's not going to worry about setting that image. Next up, we can finally set this image as well. Let's also move this tab up here. Let's grab inventory again, and I'll introduce you to another node if we haven't already worked with arrays before. Let's get. Now here we have a reference to an item in the inventory. Which item? Well, that depends on the array index. So whichever item is, say, at slot 0 will now be selected. To vary this, we can just grab our array index, because our array index over here is going to refer directly to whatever's in our inventory slot. So basically our array index is simply reading the inventory. And a lot of this stuff is just essentially reading the inventory. With our get, we can drag that back and break inventory S. Getting a bit crowded here, but that's all right. And we can actually plug our image into this slot over here. I know this is really messy, and I'm going to try and clean it up a little bit. And we can hide unconnected pins to clean that up too. As you can see, there's not really a lot of ways to avoid the overlap, but I'm hoping that you're familiar enough with blueprints that this doesn't bother you as much as it might have in the past. To reiterate, we're going to check the length of our inventory, see how many items we have. And as we check to see if the length of our inventory is equal to whatever slot we're up to, so we're not bothering with slots that have no items. And then we're going to grab the image from that slot after we've checked that that slot is there, and we're going to put that image there. And then the other thing we can set while we're here as well, let's click on break S inventory again. Let's grab that amount and plug that amount over here. So basically we're setting the image and we're setting the amount, and that's going to pop up every time we refresh the inventory. So with that done, let's move on to the button clicked script. We're going to need a variable. That variable is going to be an integer, and it's going to be called inventory slot clicked. Grab that integer, drag it in, and that's going to be set here. So we can reference what slot has been clicked here. Now, if you remember from our earlier tutorial, each of these slots has a number assigned to it. This is slot 0, and 1 and 2. So we're saving that number so we know what we're referencing in relation to the inventory. Now let's go and grab that inventory again. Let's copy reference hero up here, and we're going to use that getter node. And we'll plug that in there. So after we've set that inventory slot and we can now get the information here, we'll break that. We're going to use that in a moment. We can pop over to our designer panel because there is something else we need to design. You may remember that up here, I set 2 arrays for our event tick. The first was getting the buttons inside the inventory slots, and the second was getting the buttons that are just in the menu, so the default buttons. Well, the reason that's an array is because we're going to add some more buttons here. So grab yourself a vertical box and drag that vertical box over into here. Now the vertical box is going to try and attach itself here, but we just want it to be on top of the canvas panel. Let's move that vertical box over here to this anchor, and we're going to zero out those coordinates so we can see where it actually is, 0.5 on the alignment. Now let's move that position over on the x-axis. Basically, I want it kind of between here. Let's go with 360 for now, whatever you like. This is a design choice at this point. And then inside this vertical box, we're going to grab text. It's going to be a rich text block. Drag it on top of the vertical box here just to make sure it definitely gets in there. Then we'll get a spacer. Then we'll get a button. And I'm going to call this button underscore use. Another one. Copying and pasting on that vertical box. Button underscore drop. And a third one. Button underscore cancel. All three of these buttons, I would prefer to copy the properties of this button here. If we just close these guys, we don't need any of that. So on the background color of these buttons, I want to zero out the alpha by default. Background color, 0 alpha. And then I want to copy this rich text box and paste it on these buttons. Now with all these rich text blocks selected, that is all 4 of them now, we're going to come up to text style set and we're going to make that standard text style, because now when we update our font later, this will update with it. Now inside these text blocks, just for testing purposes, we will name this one item name. So this is the name of the item. I know it's coming up as gibberish, but we'll compile and save in just a moment. We will call this use item. We'll call this drop item, and we'll call this cancel. And then if we compile and save that, our items are coming up there. Let's go to our spacer and make that a bit bigger, and our vertical box size to content spacer can be on the y-axis. Let's give it about a, I don't know, maybe anywhere between 25 and 50, I suppose. Let's also go back over to the rich text box and center the text there. This menu will pop up when we click on an item, and then we can do these things with said item. We can either use it, drop it, or go back to the menu. So if we rename this rich text block to item name, when we come over here into the graph, we can drag that in and set text. Just like we did inside our actual HUD when we wanted to update the pickup text, we will be doing this here. And we're not going to attach that to the end of the event tick. We're going to put that down here to the end of inventory slot clicked. So essentially we're going to grab the item's name and we're going to set it straight from the inventory, and which item it is in the inventory is determined by which slot is clicked. Another thing we're going to do is grab our activate inventory holding Alt, so we get a setter, and we're going to deactivate the inventory as we've selected this item. We're also going to grab the vertical box. Here, we don't want this to be visible while we are in this section of the inventory. We only want it to be visible when we've clicked on an item. So to do that, let's go over to our variables and create another variable. It's going to be action menu visibility. And we're going to call that an E slate visibility. Back over to the designer, if we click on the drop down, we won't see anything. But then if we compile and save, we pop over here, we can see that action menu visibility. So now this item's visibility is bound to this variable. And by default, we want it to be hidden. And then we can Alt drag that in and plug that in there. So we have set the text, deactivated the inventory, and made that visible for us to do something with the item. Now, finally, we will want to set our focus onto that button. So go up to set user focus, and we'll copy that over along with our player controller. and we'll drag in our use button. And we will attach that to the end of this here. So that when we select the item, our user focus goes there. Now we'll go and see that in action. Let's compile and save over to the test map. Let's walk up to the item, pick it up. And if I was to press I and using my keypad, I'm going to go to inventory. There, the item has popped up. I know it's confusing because the image I selected was the 0 key, but you can see that there's a number 1 there because we set the amount inside the actual item. So if I was to press enter, then we get that menu for base pickup. Over here, the action menu is active, but one thing we didn't do is set those buttons to be focused or appear as focused here inside the event tick. So we'll come up here and add those buttons. As usual, I will prefer the back button to be at the bottom, and then I will drag in use, drop, and cancel. Selecting all of them, pressing Q so they're all in line. Now we'll compile, save again, go back to the test map, pick up the item, press I, down to the inventory, select the item, and now you can see that this script here is working. And next up, we would program the script to either use the item, what happens when we drop the item, and when we cancel, we'll go back to the menu. Now, because we have a little more time, let's go and create our cancel script here, because that way, even if you're testing your game, there's no way for it to be broken. I like to make sure our game can't get broken while we're testing it. So let's go up to button cancel and select on clicked. We'll drag this up here. So when the cancel button is clicked, we will, scrolling down here, we can actually drag that down here because we have so many variables. So limit the amount of scrolling we have to do. Let's drag in activate inventory holding Alt. We're going to set our inventory back to active. Next up, we're going to grab our action menu visibility, set that back to hidden. And then for now, we're going to grab set user focus script that we did here, where we put it on the use button, because we need to move the focus off the menu. Otherwise, we're going to be focused on a button that is hidden and it will be very hard to get back. And we don't want that. So for now, let's change that to inventory slot 0. Specifically inside of inventory slot 0, we want get button. And so we're just going to go back to slot 1 for now. I'll show you how to go back to whichever slot you've selected, because obviously going back to the original slot wouldn't be ideal. We'll do a quick test on that. Walking up to the item, picking it up, pressing I, down to inventory, selecting the item, and if I go cancel, we go back to the inventory, which means our game will not be broken if we were to play test it now. So that's all good to go. Next time we'll fill in the use item and drop item scripts.